Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about the new Stephen King film adaptation of his Shining sequel called Doctor Sleep. Doctor Sleep was a sequel that Stephen King worked on many, many years after his Shining novel. So it's not his most recent novel, but it's like one of his more recent novels. And like I said, this is a sequel to The Shining. This is also a sequel to the 1980 Stanley Kubrick film version of The Shining. So it's a sequel to both the actual Stephen King book and the Stephen King film adaptation from Stanley Kubrick that we got all those years ago. So in this film, you guys, Danny Torrance from the first Shining story, who was the little boy in the first movie, he's all grown up now, but he's still dealing with the trauma that he had to deal with in the Shining story. He's an alcoholic. He is a drug addict. He has a very messy lifestyle. So basically, at one point in the movie, he tries to clean up his life. He moves to a place, I believe, in New Hampshire somewhere, and he finds a job at a hospice care center. And he becomes close friends with this really friendly guy that goes to these um, Drinkers Anonymous session groups and church religious groups and um, self-help groups and all these places that basically help people clean up their lives and make sure they live sober and get their life back on track and everything like that. He even gives Danny a room to live in this town that has all these sessions and where Danny finds a job and things like that. So while Danny's working at a hospice center, he not only finds out that his shining ability from his childhood helps the patients get through basically the final days of their lives at this hospice center, but he also befriends a young girl who also has a shining ability. And he also finds out that many others besides this girl also have a shining ability. And so throughout the course of this film, a lot of people who have a shining ability, whether they're an adult or a child, are going missing. People don't know where they go, if they just are um, kidnapped or murdered or whatever the case is. But throughout the course of this film, almost all these targets are people who have shining abilities, and there's a cult group who basically lives off of their shining abilities, and it's called steaming. They basically breathe it in like oxygen, and it not only takes away their shining ability, but it also takes their lives in the process. So throughout the course of this film, this cult group wants to go after this girl that Danny is befriending because she has a very strong shining ability, and it's up to both Danny and this girl to stop this cult group once and for all. So not only do they get steamed, and get avoid being getting steamed, but they can stop this cult group once and for all. But they also have to face places of their past, specifically the Overlook Hotel for Danny himself, to get through this process and to get rid of this cult group once and for all with the help of this Overlook Hotel that from his past. So overall, guys, I really enjoyed Doctor Sleep a lot. I thought this was a very good sequel. If you were to ask me a couple years ago if how I felt about The Shining getting a sequel, I probably wouldn't have been for it. I probably would have said, leave that alone. Stanley Kubrick is long dead. If there were to ever be a sequel, Kubrick would have been the man to give it to us. But now, after seeing Doctor Sleep, after seeing what the real story was, or at least how they did it as a film, I never read the book personally myself, but as a film, how they chose to approach this as an adaptation, I was very happy with this as far as being a sequel to that Stanley Kubrick Shining movie. I thought this is a very worthy sequel. I thought this is definitely a story I can tell that Stephen King has probably thought of over the years, and clearly was really interested in Danny's shining ability from that first story and really playing off of that and seeing kind of what else he could do with Danny as an adult and things like that. So I was really happy with this film. So let's talk about some positives and negatives of Doctor Sleep. So first and foremost, guys, um, there are some really awesome Overlook Hotel moments in this movie. So if you're happy to see a film that goes back to the Overlook Hotel, puts Danny back in that scary place, really kind of pushes him to his limits and things like that. You get some awesome Overlook Hotel moments in this movie. They're scary. They're definitely in the spirit of how Stanley Kubrick filmed them back in the day. They're explore new things with it. I really like whenever this film goes back to the Overlook Hotel, whether it is a flashback, whether it is Danny himself as an adult, going back to that place, taking this girl with him. I really enjoyed all the Overlook Hotel moments and how they expanded the Shining universe overall. The film also has a big message on dealing with trauma, how it's important to move on from it, to, if you have to move somewhere, do it. If you have to take therapy sessions, do it. If you have to start a new job, do it. If you find an ability that you have that can help others, do a job where you can do that. So I really like how Stephen King really tries to motivate his viewer here, specifically in the movie anyway, that when you're dealing with trauma, it's important that you're always figuring out what that next step of your life is going to be and how you're going to resolve that and how you can put all that pain from the past behind you and move forward. And I thought it was a very successful story about dealing with trauma and all the interesting ideas of how to pursue this and how to not have to live with it for the rest of your life. I also like how this film explores other people who have the ability to shine, whether they're good or they're bad. How there's people who feed on it, like this cult group. I really like how Stephen King expanded that because there's, obviously the first Shining story explored Danny having this ability, but this story in particular really tried to expand what is it like for other people to have shining abilities. What do the people who are good with it? What do the good people do with it? The people who are bad, what do they do that's bad with it, and why they choose to do bad things with it. So I like how this film explores all the goods and bads of other people who have the ability to shine as well. I also thought this film surprisingly had very strong visual effects. Whenever there's a scene where Rebecca Ferguson's villain is trying to track down this little girl and she has to try to um, fly there with her shining ability and kind of figure out where this person lives and things like that. Very, very strong visual effects, 100% believable. It's very hard to kind of imagine somebody filming it in a way, just because what they were able to capture on film is just so surreal and so great, and has a one point perspective that really is truly believable to the character that they're showing it from. Whether it's the Overlook Hotel and recreating scenes and taking characters from the past and trying to make them look the way that they did back then and things like that. Very strong visual effects here. Mike Flanagan, who directed this film, did a very good job with the visual effects here. Very strong visual effects, and I love them. I also like all the Stanley Kubrick touches in this film, whether it's the cinematography, the use of color, the use of scares, the use of characters, showing the trauma, showing kind of how people are really scared of something. All those Stanley Kubrick touches from The Shining are very present here. You can tell that Mike Flanagan is not only inspired what Stanley Kubrick has made, but he also goes his own path with this, continues what Stanley Kubrick started, and give us a true follow-up of Stanley Kubrick touches that are almost pretty much necessary for a sequel like this to live up to The Shining. I thought the overall acting performances are very good here, whether it's Ewan McGregor as Danny, whether it's this young girl who also has shining abilities. The actor who played the friend of Ewan McGregor was very likable and very fun in this movie. Rebecca Ferguson played a big villain in this movie. I liked all the actors and actresses they got to play basically these people who live off of the steaming and try to feed off of people who can shine and things like that. So great acting performances overall. I was very happy with that in this movie. I was also very impressed with the scary visuals in this film. I thought they were very scary, whether it is the Overlook Hotel, or whether it is, um, creeping down a dark hallway, or Danny dealing with something from his past, or things like that. So I thought all the scares are very well handled in this movie. I also liked how this cult really was kind of creating a nationwide problem. How one day it's a problem in Iowa, one day it's a problem in Ohio, another day it's a problem in New Hampshire, another day it's a problem in California, and then another day it's a problem in Colorado, not too far from the Overlook Hotel. So I really like how this film addresses that this cult was kind of everywhere. It was nationwide. It was kind of hard to trace where some of these people went and things like that. So I really liked how the film played off of that mystery and gave us a very strong cult group to work with to kind of make it believable that all these terrible things were happening. For my negatives of Doctor Sleep, though, I thought Act 1 of this film was very slow. Yes, I understand that they were trying to show us how Danny kind of didn't transition into adulthood very well, how he was struggling with all this trauma from his past. But I thought it was very slow. I thought they could have quickened this up quite a bit. I thought the runtime would have been more respectable this way, and I think the film would have had a better sense of pacing with some of this trimmed out of the movie. So I thought Act One of this film was pretty slow for the most part. Going back to that point too, I thought the film was roughly 20 minutes longer than it should have been. Like I said, easily 20 minutes could have been trimmed out of this movie. I think a lot of that could have been a lot of the Act One stuff. So roughly 20 minutes, I think, could have been trimmed out of this movie. This film I also thought was more thriller than horror. So if you're looking for another really scary Stephen King true sequel to that Stephen King Shining story, unfortunately this is more so a thriller than a horror film. There's certainly horror elements here. Yes, it is still a sequel to The Shining, but for those who are hoping for a straight up haunted house horror film, unfortunately Doctor Sleep is more so a thriller with horror elements. So if you're going into this film expecting a horror film, I would say it's more so a thriller with horror elements, really. I also thought that whole vampire cult group thing that Rebecca Ferguson was in charge of, even though I liked it, I liked the characters and the acting performances from it, I thought that cult group didn't fit this Shining universe very well. Because for me personally, when that came to that first Shining movie, more of the supernatural stuff was like the ghosts and the things in the hotel and things like that. This film tries to explore what if there's other things outside the hotel that are kind of in the same vein as that, like as this cult group, and what if there's vampires somewhere, and what if Frankenstein once existed, and things like that. So I thought that whole cult group thing didn't fit this universe as well as I'm sure Stephen King or this director of this movie were probably hoping for. I also thought the overall overlooked hotel, when they finally get to it in the movie, had very low security. They were able to break it with basically a crowbar and a piece of wood to get inside it. It felt like they almost kind of just left it there for days after the first Shining movie. It didn't feel like 40 years had passed since the events of that movie happened. It felt very fresh and clean in comparison, I guess. So kind of low security on that for a condemned hotel, and I kind of had a hard time believing it as a result. There's also a scene too I can't get into too much detail on. It would have been the perfect opportunity for Jack Nicholson to make a cameo appearance in this movie. They didn't do it. They did something else that I thought was very cheesy and kind of not so great. But for those who know what I'm talking about, I wish they kind of did a Jack Nicholson cameo instead. I know he's quote unquote retired right now, but if they did, I think the scene would have worked out better and would have fit kind of what they were going for with that scene a little better for those who know what I'm talking about when they're inside the Overlook Hotel. Just personal preference on that. Can't really get into detail too much on that either. So just my personal opinion on that one moment there. So overall, Doctor Sleep, I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Very strong sequel to a Shining movie that I never thought we were going to get a strong sequel to. Strong follow-up. Very happy with the Shining sequel. Like I said, a couple things like pacing and editing probably could have been a little bit better and things like that. Overall, I was very happy with this movie. 8.5 out of 10 for me. If you like Stephen King, if you like The Shining, 8.5 out of 10 for me. Highly recommend seeing Doctor Sleep.